So, I'm the type of person who's overly cautious when purchasing new gear. This is because there tends to be a lot of hype at the beginning of any new item. And the last thing I want to do is jump on the bandwagon and buy something I really don't need. I gotta do my research first, if you know what I'm saying. I've been in the market for a wide-angle lens for a long time, particularly one that suited well for a Micro Four Thirds system, and even more specific for my G85 camera. Now, when it comes to purchasing lenses for my camera, there are 4 main criteria that I kinda look for. It's gotta be lightweight, it's gotta be relatively small, it has to have lower aperture capabilities, and it has to be decently priced. At the beginning of 2020, I couldn't find a suitable lens within this criteria, so I just stuck with my Panasonic kit lens for the time being. In 2022, the Panasonic 9mm f1.7 came out, and I had my eyes on it, but I decided to wait for more reviews and see if it was actually for me. Also, I wanted it for a discount. Finally, on a November Black Friday evening of 2023, I made the decision and purchased it. So lo and behold, Panasonic 9mm f1.7. So as of today, I've had this lens for almost a year now, and I gotta say, it's now a lens I use quite often. So what do I use this lens for? Well, it's pretty simple. First, I use it for establishing shots. Establishing shots is just an introduction to a place for your film. And sometimes these are wider shots to capture the place as a whole. You see that a lot in movies and TV shows, and having a lens like this gives me that option to do so. Second, I use it for tracking or movement shots. These types of shots are typically moving shots that lock onto a subject or showcase a scene, and are great for this type of lens as it gives a wide enough perspective to showcase what's happening around the area. And lastly, I use it in tight spaces. I always had a difficult time to capture a wider shot in a tight space, and with this lens, it really helps with that. How can you get the most use for this lens? Knowing me, if I'm spending my hard-earned money on something, I'm gonna find ways to use it to its max. So that said, the first part requires a bit of investment. First, I would get an ND filter for this lens. If you're filming out in daylight or very well-lit scenes, and you want to have blurry backgrounds or bokeh for your subjects while maintaining the right shutter speed for your frame rate, then this is a must. Second thing I would consider would be a mist filter. This one is optional, but for me I find it valuable to have the highlights kind of bloom in my shots, which gives it a particular look that I'm going for. This won't be used in those corporate or real estate type shots, where maybe the clients in that niche would like a more clean or sharp look to it. You might need a lens adapter for your filters in case you plan to use different size lenses down the line. My ND and bloom filters are 82mm. I have a 55mm to 82mm adapter for those on the Panasonic 9mm lens. Also, I would typically put my mist filter first and then an ND filter on top. That way when it gets dark, I can just unscrew the ND filter and still have my mist filter on, ready to go. Now I found out that using a gimbal with this lens allows for more usage out of it, as you unlock the option to create dynamic shots without having to worry too much about rolling shutter. This one, again, is optional, as you can just do handheld. But here's the important part when you are filming handheld. Be sure your movements are more gentle so that later you can have the option to use warp stabilizer in post-production to smoothen out the shots. Keep in mind it won't work all the time, so I would also get an establishing still shot when going out to film, which are just as powerful as any gimbal shot. Just be sure to focus on your framing. That's great and all, but what are the cons about this lens? So even though the G85 camera has great stabilization, it does have more noticeable rolling shutter when it's being handheld using this particular lens. And what is rolling shutter? It's essentially when you are filming and moving around, the footage could have like a warpy-like effect on it, which is difficult to fix in post-production. My way to combat this is to have more gentle ninja-like steps when doing handheld movements. Also, using a gimbal will help. And finally, just get still shots. Now, of course, one of those things is an additional investment, so that's something to keep in mind. So at the end of the day, is it worth it? Before this lens, I used a kit lens, the Panasonic 12 to 60mm f3.5 to 5.6. To be honest, I think the kit lens is sufficient enough for a wide angle. and it got me by for 4 years, being able to fulfill the things I needed. The plus is that it's a zoom lens, so I had the ability to switch from wide to close-up relatively quick. But the downside would be its low light capabilities, since it's only at f3.5. For most of the time, I had to swap the kit lens with my Panasonic 25mm f1.7 lens, which is not as wide. But now with this new wide-angle lens, it solves my problem. I think the important takeaway here is to take your time when getting your gear. Really understand what you actually need. The really cool part of having limited amount of gear is that it sparks creativity. You will find out that you don't need much to recreate some of the best shots out there. And you can really benefit from that down the line. But of course, it might cause inconveniences and headaches in between. But you will thank yourself in the future for it.